Good day to whoever has decided to watch my presentation. Thank you so much for choosing this paper for you to watch. My paper is actually titled Chavacano Verbs that refuse to express bona fide verb functions, instances of non-finiteness. I am Abby M. Santos from Zamboanga State College of Marine Sciences and Technology, and I am a faculty member of specifically a College of Education and Liberal Arts. So let me begin by presenting to you the roadmap of this presentation. First, I'll be talking a little bit about the impetuses of my paper, which is going to be followed by the introduction and the literature review, which is going to be followed by the methods and the research questions, the results and discussions, and of course the conclusions and recommendation. So without further ado, let me present to you the impetuses of my paper. One of the impetuses of this research paper is the fact that there is scanty literature on Chavacano language description. This is actually proven on the fact that the literature that you can find on Chavacano language are not really recent. Some of them are dated way back 1980s or even later than 1980s. And I would say, as someone who is really dealing with Chavacano language, that the literature on the description of this particular language is inadequate. Thus, the necessity to do a lot of research to describe the language. There is also a challenge to describe creoles and dialects as posed by John Hone, and I believe it's also anchored to the fact that there is scanty literature on the description of languages that are deemed creoles, and also because of the emergence of MTB-MOE, or the mother tongue based multilingual education, because it is here to stay, and Chavacano is one of the local languages in the Philippines. It is a language that's used to teach young learners. And there are also literature gaps, like the fact that there is no description on the non-finite constructions in the Chavacano language, and also my personal interest in the Chavacano language structure, as I am a native speaker of this particular language. So let me bring your attention to the introduction. According to Home in 2001, Chavacano is a flourishing Spanish-based Creole. It is in fact a Creole that is spoken in Zamboanga, and there is a variety spoken in Ternate, Cavite, in Davao, and also Cotabato and elsewhere. But the one that's really flourishing is the one that's spoken here in Zamboanga City. It is a Philippine Creole Spanish, which is more commonly known as Chavacano, whose variants, as I've already mentioned, include Caviteño, Ternateño, Cotabateño, Davaoeño, and of course Zambongueño. And Zambongueño, according to Lipsky 1987, is the only surviving PCS of these 5 variants. This paper is actually framed from the substratist and superstratist hypotheses in Creole formation, where the superstrate and substrate languages contribute properties to the Creole, where the superstrate is actually the language that is deemed to be the influential one in the formation of the Creole, and in the case of Chavacano, it is Spanish. The substrate languages are those that come from within the locality where the language is spoken. Like in the case of Chavacano, we have Tagalog or Filipino and Cebuano and some other languages. To continue, let me bring your attention this time to the literature review. Now, as Crystal explained in 2008, a finite verb can independently occur in an independent sentence or main clause where formal contrasts in tense and mood are permitted. According to Busman in 1996, a finite verb form pertains to the conjugated form marked according to tense, voice, person, number, and mood. And according to Summer Institute of Linguistics, they define that finite verbs are a form that figures in an independent clause and is fully inflected in accordance to the categories of inflection marked on verbs in the language. In other words, if you're going to look at these definitions, at their polar opposite, that is where you can see what non-finite verbs are. In other words, they do not manifest or exhibit tense or mood for that matter. To continue, we have a presentation here, a sample sentence by Castellon in the year 2012. I want to bring your attention to this verb here with the R morpheme there. Liega in Spanish is actually approach in English, and according to Castellon, this is analyzed by him as an infinitive. To continue, we have another example here of verbal, a non-finite construction in Spanish, where you see haciendo is a verb in Spanish, and in English it appears to, I'm sorry, haciendo is not a verb in Spanish, but rather it's a verbal, and in English it figures as a gerund, and later we will be able to see that just because it's a gerund in English, it does not mean it's exactly the same in Spanish. That's also according to Castellon in the year 2012. Now let me bring your attention to another sentence. I want you to bring your attention to sentado over there, which is so in the English language, and according to Castellon, this is also an instance of a verbal or a verbal construction in Spanish that actually does not exhibit finiteness. And let me just again clarify that I am presenting the structure of Spanish here because Spanish happens to be the super straight language of Chavacano. In other words, a lot of the words that are seen in the Chavacano language emanate from the Spanish language. Now to continue, according to Borgonovo in 1996, the verbal bailando right here, which is dance, is actually a gerund, according to him. And I want to bring your attention to the NDO morpheme. To continue, according to Gallego in 2010, although this is this sentence figures as incorrect with the asterisk there if you allow the insertion of it, but the verb recogido here, which ends in IDO, which means speak up, is a verbal, or should I say a non-finite construction in Spanish. And recogiendo right here is a gerund, which ends in NDO, and we have recoger, which ends in this case ER, which is an infinitive. We have basically pretty much the same verbs, but they function differently in the different sentences. The first one ends in IDO, which is a past participle. Here it's NDO, which is a gerund, and here it's ER, which is an infinitive according to Gallego. And these things, let me just tell you in advance, are at times can be seen in the Chavacano language structure, especially for the infinitives. For the methods, I actually did a qualitative descriptive approach because I did not use any statistical techniques or analysis for the data. Everything had to be done qualitatively, especially using the linguistic analysis. And for the sampling technique, I used the purposive sampling technique where I precisely knew the speakers of the Chavacano language, and I knew for certain that they were native speakers of the language. For the data gathering procedure, first I have the introspection because I am a native speaker of Chavacano myself. I have utilized that as one of my data gathering procedures. I also have a recording of natural conversations, which I did manually, that every time I hear a sentence being produced, a construction that is relevant to the sentential construction that I'm studying, I would record it manually, and then I would approach the native speaker who produced such a sentence for some questions pertinent to the structure. And then I also have elucidations and grammaticality judgment to fortify the research further. These are data gathering procedures where I had some sentences in Filipino, which I had the native speakers in Chavacano, native speakers of Chavacano. I had them translate these sentences. And going back to grammaticality judgment, I also had sentences which I generated and asked them to adjudge its grammaticality, or adjudge their grammaticality. And of course, as I've already mentioned earlier, the linguistic analysis of utterances, because there were no statistical analysis done, it was all linguistic analysis of these utterances that formed part of the investigation of the data. For my research questions, the first one is, how are the non-finite verbs expressed in Zamboanga Chavacano structure? And number two, what are the functions of these grammatical properties in the language under investigation? First, for the first research question, I wanted to just look at the form or syntactic structure of the non-finite verbs in Chavacano. And the second research question has something to do with their grammatical functions, how they function in the sentence. Let me now bring your attention to results and discussion, and these are the sentences that I got from my data. If you're going to look at these Chavacano sentence, it has a preposition de right over there, and we can see the R morpheme right here. And this is infinitive, and it shows a very close structure with Spanish, as Spanish also use infinitives as constructions occurring with prepositions. And my analysis is that the infinitives in Chavacano, they actually have the R morpheme as the last morpheme in the structure of the word, and not the ER/IR as are exhibited in Spanish. And that is, my analysis is that because the verbs in Chavacano, when they're finite, you would have, for instance, the verb hablar here in this sentence it's an infinitive. When this is tensed, you will see the verb habla only. So my analysis is that this particular verb, this morpheme, infinitive morpheme, is only the R morpheme in Chavacano. When finite, again, the R gets dropped. Another example would be cosa el precio del seguir con Jesus. So I would want you to bring your attention to the preposition del, right there, which means of, and the verb seguir, again, there goes the R with it. So that is infinitive. We have de as a preposition and del right here. They pretty much mean the same, but there are some instances where you can see that de and del are kind of different, but that's a totally different subject matter to discuss. And it appears with the preposition del, as de or del, as I've already mentioned. And as you can see, the function of these particular Infinitives, as that's my second research question, are adverbial. And also adjectival. So they have an adverbial and adjectival readings as prepositional phrases. For this next sentence, we have del there again, which is of, and the verb tentar, which is non-finite, or should I say the infinitive. And there goes the R again. It appears with del still, but this time, as opposed to the sentences earlier, has a nominal reading. Carrying on with still infinitives, we have now the preposition seen, and there goes the infinitive marker. So it appears with seen, and this time it has an adverbial reading. Now, here's another one where al invitar contigo hindi tu anda. Invitar right there is inflected with the infinitive, but it can appear with al, but it can also just be constructed without al. But al here can still be analyzed. It's pretty much the same as the other prepositions like de and del. So there we go. Ligar right there also has the infinitive, and al is also not obligatory. So this may appear with the preposition al and has an adverbial reading, and it has a temporal meaning as well. As you can see here, when you get invited, invitar contigo. Here, when he arrives, ligarle. So it carries some sort of a mode, should I say, but that still requires a deeper dissection or investigation. So this time we have another preposition, for in English. And there you can see the infinitive right there, the R ending for the verb depende. Here it's depender. And it appears with the preposition por, obviously, and has an adverbial reading. Carrying on. Here this is kind of different because it appears with an affix, maka. But this verb right there appears with the infinitive, but again the analysis is that it's not a preposition but rather it's an affix. And this time there's another example, makagritar, but there's the R right there, but this is just an affixation, as I've already mentioned, but this has an adjectival reading. And maka here, I believe, according to Senya 2012, is an affix that is used for adjectives, and I'm using the same analysis, or I am subscribing to the same analysis. Still on infinitives, this appears to be, I believe, in the initial analysis, that it's a fossilized kind of infinitive because it only appears with these particular word. Mal is not just an affix, it's neither a preposition. So it appears to be fossilized, as this is the only case where a structure appears without another affix or a preposition. But there's also one thing that needs to be kept in mind in the results and findings. We have del here, but notice that the verb does not appear with the R. Del mandiga. And as you can see, man here is actually analyzed as a verbalizer, and the same thing is happening here. Okay, that is because the verb biga, to flirt, and complain, obviously to complain, these are not Spanish derived verbs, so the R morpheme does not figure in these particular verbs, as you can see. Now there's also an analysis done by Lipsky and Santoro in the year 2000, where they say that the infinitive right here is actually, it appears to have no marker at all, and their analysis is that this is an infinitive, and I am subscribing to that analysis as well. And there can also be the para can also be, according to Lipski and Santoro, these are, I'm sorry, let me bring that back. So we have para here is actually an infinitive marker, which means for or in order to, but it functions more like a complementizer right there. And the infinitive in this case does not appear with the R morpheme like the rest of the infinitives that I've shown. So as items appear with prepositions, the phrases can have adverbial, adjectival, or nominal readings. And when affixed with maka, it functions adjectively and can figure without the R morpheme after adjectives like sabe or necesita, as analyzed by Lipski and Santoro in the year 2000. And it also appears after para, for or in order to, likewise without the R morpheme attached, but this is analyzed as an infinitive marker, para, by Lipski and Santoro. And para also functions as a complementizer. The R morpheme doesn't figure in non-Spanish derived verbs. Now let me bring your attention to NDO. This has an adjectival reading, obviously. Ya mira yo con él cargando de su bag. So cargando there, NDO, this comes from Spanish, and this can still be analyzed as gerund. The same case can be seen here, NDO right there, okay, cargando, carrying, and this time it has an adverbial reading that is analyzed as gerund. Now, there is a hesitation for participles because they appear to be just adjectives in Chavacano. Look at the adjective dormido, which means asleep, and denigrido, which means bruised in this case. I have a hesitation to analyze them as participles. So my analysis initially is that these do not exhibit the non-finite status exactly the same as that of infinitives and gerunds, as can actually be seen in this particular sentence. Aburrido, so bad-tempered. There's also the IDO there, but this appears to be just an adjective. This does not emanate from any verb synchronically. Aburrido, bad-tempered, simply functions as an adjective which appears to behave like dormido, asleep, and denigrido, bruised, in the previous sentences I have presented. Again, there's a hesitation for these participles, as these are the structures in Spanish. I have a hesitation to call them as participles as well in Chavacano, as they simply appear to be just adjectives. For my conclusion, I say that Chavacano has inherited the Spanish morpheme in its non-finite constructions, although the language has managed to have features unique to its own structure. It has an infinitive which mostly requires the co-occurrence with prepositions, functioning adjectively, adverbially, or nominally. But I should also say that the morpheme, the R morpheme in the verbs that are non-Spanish derived, of course, it does not figure. Its gerund has I'm sorry for the typo, but its gerund has both adjectival and adverbial readings, but these do not seem to be permissible in all verbs. So I am also suggesting that probably these are, I mean, the morphemes seen in the Chavacano verbs that are deemed gerunds are also fossilized. So an in-depth investigation is still necessary. So for my recommendations, we have to analyze further the syntactic phenomenon of serial verbs. Verbs in Chavacano where there appears to be not just a single verb, but 2 or 3 or even 4 verbs coming together where they share the tense, for instance, of, or should I say only one tense, but there's actually more than one verb in the sentence, which is common to Creoles. So it should be analyzed further if the verbs coming after the initial verb should be analyzed as infinitives, or should they be analyzed just as finite verbs. So that has to be analyzed further. Do an inventory of the verbs that the gerundial structure is permissible. It may be an instance of fossilization, as Lipsky claims. So, as I've already said, probably the gerunds in Chavacano are actually just fossilized, as they are not very common constructions like the infinitives, which appear with prepositions. So with that, I would like to say muchísimas gracias con todo con ustedes. That's thank you very much to all of you. God bless you.